hard to get.
All right. I think we are live. Tam, thanks for being here today on this afternoon. In fact, I've lost track of what day it is. I think it's like March 53rd or 54th, 2020 in this era of COVID, and I really appreciate you being here, especially in your leadership position with the Greater Austin Black Chamber. You've got a lot going on, but this live interactive interview will hopefully be a chance for you to share in real time and let people ask you questions. As I told you before the call, the whole reason for creating these Catalyst Talks was the fact that the book that we wrote was Leadership and Strategy in a Changing World. And what do we have right now? Nothing other than a changing world. So thank you for being here today. We've got so much to talk about. I just want to jump right into it. But the first question is, how are you doing? How is the family? And how are you doing sheltering?
Oh, Joseph, thank you so much for having us me here. I'm so used to saying us, but I still see it.
Well, your 7-year-old counts,
Yeah, my 7-year-old, I can hear in the background, so I apologize for that noise. We are doing fine as a family. In general, it is tough for children, in particular, explaining to an elementary school child why she can't play with her friends or go just to walk to our neighborhood park. Yeah. So we've been exercising and we walk past the park, but we can't go in. As a organization, we are like other organizations struggling to make certain that they are struggling to make certain that we are on top of it and morphing into what our membership and our business owners need right now. And so, and we've done that in various ways, and that's ever changing because, as you said earlier, so much has changed in our world. And I had to explain to one of our school administrators that everything has changed. And I think a light bulb went off in her head. So I was like,
let's get directly into some of these issues. And I've got your resources page from your website that we can pull up in a minute when that's necessary. But you're right. This is exposing all kinds of, it's exposing access and opportunity to money and resources. It's exposing the connection between healthcare and work. It's exposing the future of the workforce. So what do you think is most important to your members, the companies that you work with, and what are the trends that you're seeing? And we'll take the conversation for the next 20 minutes or so.
So, not unlike most people, access to capital right now is going to be timely and of the essence. You'll see those businesses that are able to survive will have been able to have a decent cash flow in this pandemic. We are seeing some disparity in distribution of a lot of the programs that are revolving around that access. And some of the programs were unfortunately fail from the start, but I also understand that none of us have been through this, like not a soul, unless you were 2 years old during the flu pandemic in 1918. And even then you don't have the mental capacity at 2 to give us any help to help us navigate that.
That's right. Well, so you mentioned one of the things that wasn't designed for this. So the SBA loan program was not designed to handle this kind of caseload. 45,000% increase in people applying for loans. That's one problem. I'd like to know your thoughts on how people are getting access there. And then number 2, a lot of banks are just giving loans to existing customers and not to people who perhaps were doing the right things and never even needed a loan. What do you know about that?
Well, I know a lot because oftentimes African-American businesses, in particular in Central Texas, are bootstrapped. They pay for everything themselves. It's just kind of that same kind of mentality. So a lot of them don't have relationships with bankers in the beginning. Those who have seen some success had relationships with small bankers, and they were able to fast track and get them part of that 20% of those loans that went to small business. So my thoughts are that it's even more crucial now than ever to make certain that you maintain relationships outside of just the transactional one-offs, but making certain that you maintain those, which have been sound business practices forever. And it's just, this is highlighting that the importance of that even more so.
Yeah. So there's a lot of discussion in the news about the need to reopen. What are you advising members that are in your organization about the rush to open, the need for training on things like cleanliness in the workplace in terms of keeping things sterilized and the proper PPE equipment? Is that conversation beginning, or are people still pretty much hunkered in?
people are really hunkered in. I think that you'll begin to see those conversations widen. But the reality is you really can't service people if you're afraid for your own health care.
Yeah.
And if you, God forbid, have a health trauma, right? And so although we need to open the economy, we need to be smart about that and rolling that out in a way that makes sense. So I'm glad to see that the governor has a task force that's going on to figure out how to do that. I am a little saddened that it's not as bipartisan as I'd like to see it. But I think the workaround is that our chamber, along with some other chambers and organizations, have been asked to help kind of feed into that task force and allow them to know what our concerns are. So I'm hopeful that that does not fall on deaf ears and that we're able to offer valuable input.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I put up here on the screen side by side with our faces is the COVID resources. Kind of walk us through how you kind of built that in terms of, is there a particular specialty in it? Is there a certain focus in it? How often are you updating those links? And I would imagine it could be of value to people more than just your members.
Oh, absolutely. Because I often say economies don't happen in vacuums. So our market is a focus with Black business, but we help everyone because it behooves us to have a healthy economy, right? And so the sooner we can get that done, the better off we are. So the thought process behind this was, what do members really need? What do people really need? And so people are going to need marketing and thinking of their business models in a different way that perhaps they never have thought of before, i.e. you see restaurants.
Yeah, let me interrupt to ask that question because I think it's important. How many of your member companies would you say were already, call it online savvy, and how much of a presence did they have? Did you see a breakdown, whether it be service industry or product, and how much of that education process are people going through right now?
Yes, so service industry was savvy enough to realize that they needed some kind of online presence, realizing that 80 to 90% of people start their search for their purchase online, and that number just continues to grow. So we saw service, with exception of like hair salons. We have a lot of barbers and hair salons, mom and pop kind of operations, and a lot of them did not have that. So that's been. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it's interesting because one of the interviews I did, I think interview 4 or 5, were 2 women entrepreneurs, April Dominguez, in fact, who has created an app called Handsome specifically for the beauty industry, for that very audience you're talking about. And more than just advertising outward, it's also a community to be able to talk amongst each other, to share best practices. So I'm going to drop that in the comment section later on when I post this. But I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to find it interesting that the same thing is happening that you're observing, that they're observing.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. We had one of our members that also was able to do that with technology as well. She came up with an app that helped people find the right barber. So the companies that will survive this will be able to switch and go on a dime, right? And be able to integrate technology more into the process. So I got a little interruption.
Oh, good. Has she got what she needs?
No, but we'll work through it. This is what everyone's facing now, right?
This is exactly. So let's talk about, what have you seen as far as best practices among some of the member companies that you're talking to in terms of how they've adjusted to working from home, whether it's questions of boundaries, whether or not 7-year-olds even appreciate the boundaries that are needed, work schedule. What are you learning? What are you seeing that can be helpful to others?
So what I've seen that works and what's worked for me, and even before this, I am a widowed mother of 2. So my normal looks different than a lot of other people. So I just allow myself grace. So that is, the 7-year-old's going to walk in on the interview. They don't get it. They don't understand it. The 7-year-old will get a fever when you are to present a big proposal. And, and I've had major CEOs give my kids snacks while I'm presenting to them, because they understand it as well. So best practices, I think, just kind of, we all have to extend grace to each other, and we're all in this together, and we're doing the very best that we can, and just be more considerate, I think, of mankind.
No, absolutely. Well, we talk all the time about the first line, if you will, the front lines, which are the sick and the healthcare workers that are there trying to combat this invisible enemy. And then secondly, you have those people that are immediately out of work. And then that third line, which is where you're probably putting all your focus on a professional standpoint, are those businesses or companies that are trying to hold it together. And those can be heavy subjects. So on a lighter note, a question I heard asked on a webinar, which I thought was fabulous, which is if you were to go into the future, turn around and look back at this moment, what are the things that are you as a person or as the CEO of your organization are hopeful for that could change for the future? They say, well, it sucked. It sucked for a lot of people, certainly, but some good came out of it. What would you think would be the silver linings that you hope?
The best thing that I can say, and this spans professional and personal, is the need to recognize the common ground of our social humanity and the need to be together and with each other. So I'm hopeful that I think this is a big, just huge sit down, and that we have to recognize and take a step back.
We all got put in timeout. So you were playing together nicely, go sit in timeout.
And we all were not, we mean to talk to that person. We mean to develop that business relationship that was not as transactional, and we never got around to it. So it's forced us all to look at, like, what do we really want to inherit in our lives and pass on, right? And so that's the biggest thing I hope. I also think that, I know this sounds odd, but I hope that we don't take it all so seriously, because the most important things that we have don't actually revolve around money.
Yep.
And so I think, and money's important. I'm a diehard capitalist, so I will never ever rebuke it. But I also understand that the things I care the most about have little monetary value.
Yeah. No, that's very well said. In fact, as a combat vet, and a lot of my vets feel the similar way, I don't want to speak on behalf of all of them, but having been in an actual combat zone and having attended so many memorial services, I don't care to remember the exact number, that, I have seen it in worse. Well, hello. I have seen it even worse. And so when the worst thing that's happening right now for some people, again, there's 3 different tiers, and I want to speak to those that are still able to work from home and still that can afford to shelter in place without too much adversity. But just like you have when your daughter just walked through there, you get to spend a lot more time. What do you think will be the impact on our kids going forward? What are they going to remember out of this moment in time?
I'm hopeful. And I actually had this conversation with my children yesterday. I'm hopeful that they will understand the importance of staying together and putting those values first and foremost without a pandemic or such a traumatic experience. I'm fearful that they will carry, because if you think about generations that were in a depression and what happened, and you'll see the little lady who saves everything and is, penny wise.
Yep. That would be my grandmother, Anna Kopser.
Yeah. Yep. Yes. I'm hopeful I'm fearful, that they may not be as risk open, because they've had to shelter in place and they've had this big looming fear. My 7-year-old told me that she didn't want, and she's present obsessed, and she said that she didn't want any birthday presents this year. All she wanted was a new house and the coronavirus to go away.
Yeah.
And that is just, eye-opening.
Yeah. Well, Jason Dorsey, who is a generational expert, meaning that he understands through his survey and research, understands how to explain the differences in generations, like you just talked about. We defined the World War II generation, the greatest generation, by their shared experience going through the Great Depression first. That was a decade plus, and then right into World War II, which was 5 years. So a 15-year shared experience. What's unique about this one, even though it won't be 15 years, I hope, is that it was global. It was absolutely global. And kids of all ages are going to be able to remember and relate to one another globally. Fascinating. I never thought of it the way you described it there, but that is true. So we're getting near the end, because I like to keep these around 20 minutes. So what did I not ask you that people should be thinking about, or that you're working with in your organization professionally as a CEO, that people are not yet talking about enough?
I really think that, so a lot has been made about leadership, and that this is twofold for me, and that leadership is different. I don't wholeheartedly buy into that. I think that leadership is the essence of it. So I think things are highlighted either in a negative way or highlighted in a positive way, depending on who you were before.
Yep.
That being said, that some of our systems that we've had in place, we're seeing some negative impact and some disparities. They've always existed. We're seeing how important it is to circumvent that before such tragedy.
So without naming names or companies, can you give a little more example of what you mean by some of these anecdotes?
Sure. The banking industry in particular, and I have banking relationships that are great, but seeing that, and they were, again, we all have just been under the gun. So they were forced to kind of shift when the loans were processed for the federal loans and the other loans, that they had to kind of choose, who can I get this to quickly? And perhaps I'm going to go and favor someone who already has an existing relationship with me. Yep. Well, a lot of Black businesses are bootstrapped. They don't have that access to capital in the first place for various reasons, for systemic racist reasons as well, that still plague our country to this day. And right now we're seeing how we're seeing immediate, lack of access to healthcare immediately can equal your death. Well, the reality is, Joseph, bad policy always costs lives. Yeah, it always, somewhere along the spectrum, maybe not so immediately, but it always will cost someone a life somewhere. Like if you have a really bad educational policy, you can expect for generational poverty to cycle itself for generations to come. Yep.
And that generational poverty leads to worse income effects, leads to worse crime effects, leads to worse healthcare effects. There's a book by Bob Putnam called Our Kids. He's a Harvard professor. It is just fascinating looking at how America diverged after World War II. And as you said, there were racially charged institutional barriers put in place, whether it be home ownership or where people could live. For the viewers that want to know more about it, just Google in, redlining. Cities like Austin, 1928, notoriously bad practices that still have their legacy to this day. So yeah, I think that's interesting. You point out the fact that people aren't talking enough about how leadership hasn't changed, but this is certainly exposing lapse or gaps, I should say, in leadership and in leadership building policy. Yeah. That's fascinating. I'm going to get deeper into that, especially because I've got more time on my hands, not just for interviews like this, but also reading and blogging and sharing, exposing things. I mean, for me, what I hope this is exposed once and for all, and we can have a real discussion, is the linkage between your healthcare coverage and your work status. Yeah. Like, guess what? COVID doesn't care where you work, when you work. It's coming after all people, especially those that are more vulnerable. And so it's a wake-up call.
Yeah, it's the absolute wake-up call. It is coming after all people, but it's coming after some a little harder than others because, again, certain policies have dictated that as well, right?
And you alluded to it, and it's not just about how it's impacting people of color and the fact that they are disproportionately more affected because they are more susceptible, but it's also worth pointing out that in a lot of communities, the jobs that are still being worked that we're calling key and essential outside of healthcare have a disproportionate number of people of color too that are having to put themselves at risk to be able to do the deliveries, to be able to keep the economy moving, to be able to help us put food on our table. So yeah, you're exactly right. It's a wake up call. Well, great. Well, this, like I say, I like keeping these short and sweet, hoping that as people are on social media and they're circling around, they find the keywords or interest areas that are important to them. And Tam, I want to thank you very much for being a part of this and look forward to staying in touch. Certainly stay healthy. Stay home and stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I appreciate it.
Take care. So I want to thank you for tuning in to yet another Catalyst Talks. The whole purpose of these discussions are to be fast, They are to be interactive, to be able to make it so that when we find out influence leaders like Tam today, people who are on the cutting edge, the resources that their organizations have, or like she shared today, the COVID-19 resources, that we get them out fast. The whole reason why we wrote the book Catalyst is to make sure that people understand the assumptions by which leaders are making decisions, because they're changing. And if they change more rapidly than you are prepared for, people get into a bad way. And so we want to prevent that. So it's Catalyst, Leadership and Strategy in a Changing World. If you want to know more, visit our website, graylinegroup.com, or my personal website, josephkopser.com. And certainly if there are people or topics you'd like to hear more about, send them in. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue to reach out to the people that I find to be most fascinating, with the most important information to tell in a timely manner. Thanks a lot. And thanks for tuning in. Take care.